In 2009, District 9 became the surprise hit movie of the year. On a budget of just $30 million, the movie went on to make $210 million at the worldwide box office and was nominated for 4 Academy Awards, including Best Motion Picture. Although it didn't win any Oscars, District 9's breakout success was an impressive feat for an indie sci-fi film out of South Africa, with a first-time writer-director that featured no movie stars. So why wasn't a sequel to District 9 ever made? Here's why. A standalone story. According to District 9 mastermind Neil Blomkamp, he wasn't even thinking about making a sequel while writing, directing, and editing the film. Since Blomkamp was only planning on making a standalone film, he didn't set up the overall story arc for a sequel or a franchise. It was only after the film was edited that Blomkamp realized there was room for a sequel. But he still had no idea where that sequel would go. He also toyed around with making a prequel instead. Blomkamp told Hero Complex in 2010, "I'm not so interested in aliens coming back and blowing things up, but a prequel might be interesting." Obviously, that idea never left the ground either, and it wasn't until 2015 that Blomkamp said that he had a really cool idea for a District 9 sequel. Does that mean that a sequel is finally on the way? At the moment, it doesn't look likely. Original films. In a perfect world, production on a District 9 sequel would have started shortly after the first one was released. However, without an idea for the sequel, Blomkamp instead used the success of District 9 to get another original sci-fi film into production within months of District 9's release. That movie was Elysium, which he worked on until late 2012. While shooting Elysium, Blomkamp and his wife/co-screenwriter Terry Tatchell wrote the script for Chappie in 2 weeks. And after Elysium wrapped, they immediately started working on that. Production on that movie lasted into 2014, and it was released in theaters in February 2015. So yeah, those movies kept Blomkamp pretty busy post-District 9. Blomkamp told Rolling Stone that if he were to do the sequel properly, it would take 3 years to make. That's a big-time commitment, or while the movie that set it all off recedes into fans' memories. Other projects. Chappie was released in May 2015, and although there hasn't been much news about the director since then, Blomkamp has definitely been busy. In April 2017, Blomkamp revealed on Twitter that he would be making experimental short films for the video game platform Steam. That's a big change from big-budget sci-fi flicks. Although at this point in his career, it's certainly less risky than taking a chance on a sequel to District 9. Blomkamp was also briefly attached to direct a 5th entry in the Alien series, going so far as to release tantalizing unofficial concept art on Instagram. But unfortunately, that project probably isn't happening. In 2017, Blomkamp tweeted the awful truth: the chances of his Alien movie ever moving forward are slim, echoing an earlier tweet that the movie was set aside pending the success or failure of Alien Covenant. That doesn't mean that Blomkamp's blockbuster days are over. After all, this wouldn't be the first time Blomkamp has bounced back after being sidelined on a high-profile film project. Originally, Blomkamp was picked by Peter Jackson to direct a movie based on the Halo video game franchise. When Halo fell through, Jackson agreed to produce District 9 based on Blomkamp's 2006 short film Alive in Joburg. In other words, the fact that Blomkamp hasn't made a movie for several years now doesn't mean that a District 9 sequel will never happen, although it seems to be getting less and less likely. Sharlto Copley is busy too. Although he looks different at the end of the film, Sharlto Copley is the face of District 9. In his breakout role as a delightfully clueless bureaucrat, the South African actor wowed international audiences and launched his Hollywood career.
But I don't trust it, you know, I don't trust anything that...
Oh, you're right, bro. Vickers, you're right, eh?
After Chappie, Copley's third collaboration with Neil Blomkamp, the actor went on to star in the PlayStation series Powers and the action thriller Free Fire. As busy as he is though, Copley has made it clear that he'd gladly reprise his role if a District 9 sequel ever materialized. Hard to follow up? District 9 ended on a cliffhanger, and the universe of the film is rich with themes and storylines to explore. Copley wants to do a sequel, and the movie was a huge success for Peter Jackson's production company. In Hollywood, that combination usually adds up to a guaranteed sequel, and yet the furthest in development that District 9 sequel ever got was an 18-page treatment. One reason for that may be because District 9 was too big of a hit. Its commentary on social segregation, xenophobia, and racism blended perfectly with its sci-fi aesthetic, all of which helped it make it an overwhelming success for the first-time writer-director. That's a hard act to follow, even when the act you're following is your own. Ah, Hollywood. It's a town where the streets are paved with gold and dreams die every single day. Seriously, where's that Goonies sequel we were promised? And what the heck happened to Inception 2? But while plenty of sequels to mega-hit films have struggled and failed to claw their way out of development hell, few follow-ups have endured more setbacks than Gladiator 2. The long-awaited follow-up to one of Ridley Scott's most popular movies, Gladiator 2 has valiantly tried to battle its way into theaters. But every time it rises up, the film is beaten back down. It's time to grab your sword and helmet and finally figure out what happened. Well, Maximus is dead. When Gladiator hit theaters in 2000, the sword and sandal epic wowed critics. It currently holds an impressive score on Rotten Tomatoes, and it took home $457 million at the worldwide box office. The movie also fared well during awards season, taking home the Oscar for Best Picture and nabbing the Best Actor prize for Russell Crowe. The film pretty much turned Crowe into an international superstar, and nearly 2 decades later, people still shout lines like this.
Are you not entertained?
Naturally, with such a massive hit on their hands, DreamWorks was quick to start developing a sequel. There was just one major Colosseum-sized problem with the idea. Maximus Decimus Meridius, the main character of the movie, is kinda, dead. In the film's climactic moments, the evil Emperor Commodus, played by Joaquin Phoenix, challenges Maximus to a gladiator battle. There's no universe where Joaquin Phoenix beats Russell Crowe in hand-to-hand combat, so Commodus evens the odds by secretly stabbing Maximus before tossing him into the arena. Luckily, Maximus is fueled by revenge and righteous anger. Fighting through the pain, Maximus kills Commodus with the Emperor's own weapon before drifting away into the wheat-filled afterlife. It was a killer ending for a standalone film, but it certainly makes things tricky for a sequel. But hey, Hollywood had gotten around this kind of problem before, right? Prequel problems. These days, prequels are all the rage, with everything from Star Wars to X-Men and the Alien franchise going back to move forward. DreamWorks was looking to do the same thing to get Maximus back into the world of the living. When people started whispering about a new Gladiator movie in 2001, the word on the web was that the story would take place years before the events of the first film. It was set to focus on Maximus's early days in the Roman military, showing the Spaniards' rise from mere soldier to mighty general. Producer Douglas Wick declared talks were underway to get the ball rolling, saying, "You don't finally do something like Gladiator 2 unless you have a dazzling story to tell." The studio was reportedly looking to pay Crowe as much as $20 million to head back into the arena. The studio lined up David Franzoni, one of the original movie's writers, to put the scripts together. But much like a Roman mob, Hollywood can be fickle. And the project never made it out of development. Shifting to a sequel. Sometime between 2001 and 2002, DreamWorks decided to put the brakes on the Gladiator prequel and shift their focus to a sequel. The first big change involved David Franzoni stepping away from his typewriter to produce. The writing gig then went to John Logan, another one of the original Gladiator writers. With a new guy putting words on the page, the story was suddenly set 15 years after the events of the original film. That same year, producer Walter Parks hinted the film might possibly jump back and forth in time, but it would mainly tell the story of Lucius, the royal son of Lucilla. It would have followed Lucius as the last heir of Marcus Aurelius, as he sought out his true father, who we would have discovered would turn out to be Maximus. Director Ridley Scott seemed on board with the idea, even declaring that Logan's script was ready to go at one point. However, the sequel was going to be significantly different from the first film when it came to action. As Scott explained, he wasn't going to touch gladiators again, a potentially controversial choice for a movie tentatively called Gladiator 2. Instead, Scott was more interested in the political arena and wanted to focus on politics and praetorians, rather than blood and guts. Scott also expected to start filming in 2005, but as 2004 faded into memory, Gladiator 2 was still stuck in the cinematic mud. But work continued, and the film eventually morphed into one of the greatest movies never made. Nick Cave's Christ Killer. If you've ever heard a Nick Cave song, then you know the Australian artist is basically an old-timey prophet armed with a guitar. His songs are brutal, apocalyptic, and spiritual in an Old Testament sort of way, and you get that same vibe watching the movies he's been involved with over the years. Cave has composed music for films like Hell or High Water and The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. He's also written scripts for movies like Lawless and The Proposition. With that kind of cinematic mind, it's not surprising that Russell Crowe saw potential in Cave's fire and brimstone brain, asking Cave to write the screenplay for Gladiator 2. What is a bit surprising is how absolutely insane the script turned out to be. Cave didn't disappoint when it came to figuring out how to follow up Maximus's death. The project was titled Christ Killer and would have opened in the afterlife, with Maximus realizing he's dead. Unfortunately, there's nary a wheat field in sight, and his wife and child are nowhere to be seen. Eventually, the gladiator comes face to face with the dying gods. The decrepit deities make a deal with Maximus, promising to guide him to his family if he'll kill a god who's gone rogue, one who's betrayed the Roman faith and now professes belief in the one true God. As Maximus agrees to do their dirty work, he eventually winds up on Earth, several years in the future. After returning to the real world, he discovers little Lucius has grown up to be a savage soldier, one with a bad habit of violently murdering Christians. Maximus eventually takes a stand with the persecuted Christians, leading an army against the Roman legions, but after his victory, he's cursed to go through time as an immortal, fighting in countless wars and popping up in every conflict from the Crusades to Vietnam. If you think that sounds wild, we didn't even mention the Purgatory scene, the Colosseum filled with alligators, or the finale that takes place inside the Pentagon. Yeah, the one in Washington, D.C. Cave describes the script as a stone-cold masterpiece. Sure, why not? Not over yet. It's been pretty quiet the past decade, but Ridley Scott still hasn't given up on Gladiator. In March of 2017, Scott said he does know how to bring him back, in reference to Maximus. So, never give up, right? Maximus wouldn't. Not long after the Twilight Saga concluded, Summit Entertainment geared up for its next young adult franchise, Ender's Game. Based on the Orson Scott Card novel of the same name, Ender's Game was envisioned as the first in a series of new sci-fi films. After all, there's a ton of written material to draw from. But the series got canned long before its completion. Here's why we never got to see an Ender's Game sequel. Box office bomb. Hollywood is a business. People tend to forget that sometimes. Studio executives would love to make whatever movies they want, but they have to make sure they'll make their money back, and then some. So when Ender's Game grossed a mere $125.5 million worldwide, against a production budget of $110 million, that showed Lionsgate that audiences weren't willing to put up with an Ender's Game franchise. Variety called it one of the biggest box office bombs of the year. With that kind of response, few studios would be willing to jump onto a sequel. Boycott. There are countless reasons why a movie would flop at the box office, but for this particular film, an argument can be made that Orson Scott Card's views on homosexuality and the legalization of same-sex marriage led a number of people, especially those who are on the fence about seeing Ender's Game, to boycott the movie altogether. It's impossible to say how much of an impact the boycotts had on the movie's box office take, but there's no denying that in a politically charged climate, any negative press against a film like Ender's Game couldn't have helped. Budget constraints. Budget constraints are an ordinary occurrence in Hollywood, but it's almost never a good thing when it happens. For instance, 20th Century Fox kept the budget low for James Mangold's Logan because the director and Hugh Jackman wanted the film to be rated R. While that ended up working in their favor, a studio usually constrains a movie's budget if it doesn't seem like the film will be as successful as initially hoped. That rings true for the would-be Ender's Game sequel. The first movie had a production budget of $110 million, a fairly typical amount for a sci-fi flick, but the sequel might have seen that number dip below the $100 million mark. Director Gavin Hood originally wanted to film the first and second movies back-to-back, but Lionsgate wasn't up for that much of a gamble. Hood said, "It's a pity on many levels because that cast was all there. The sets are all there. We should have shot the two movies back-to-back." A tired trend. Before superhero movies fully took over Hollywood, each studio was attempting to launch its own young adult franchise to snag some of the success of Twilight, The Hunger Games, and Harry Potter. Some were successful, but most weren't. And at this point, young adult adaptations are a tired trend that audiences no longer seem interested in paying for. Beautiful Creatures flopped, as did The Mortal Instruments, and even initially successful YA franchises like the Divergent series suffered insanely diminishing returns. Young adult adaptations can be successful if budgets are kept low, and if the movies are marketed properly. Unfortunately, every studio wants to believe they're sitting on a gold mine, so they go full steam ahead with the first installment, which, in the case of Ender's Game, leaves little room for expansion in the sequel. Aged out. As Gavin Hood explained to Hyperbole, The proposed film sequel to Ender's Game would have been based on Ender's Shadow, which takes place concurrently with the first book. So if the studio really wanted to adapt that story, it would have made more sense to film back-to-back as Gavin Hood originally wanted to. Several years have passed, and now Asa Butterfield and Haley Steinfeld are far older than their preteen characters in the books. Butterfield has starred in several other young adult-oriented movies, such as Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children and The Space Between Us, while Steinfeld is branching out in movies like the Pitch Perfect series and The Edge of 17. It makes no sense to continue the series at this stage. Then there are the bigger actors like Harrison Ford, Ben Kingsley, and Viola Davis. With Ford returning to his iconic characters in recent years, he would be a difficult person to nail down for the young adult sequel. To get all these people together again would likely require more money than Lionsgate would be willing to cough up. TV spin-off. Even if Lionsgate and the cast were to consider a sequel, could the studio afford it? Hood made no secret about having difficulties obtaining enough money for Ender's Game. If he was having trouble getting $110 million in 2013, he's not going to be able to get enough money now. And remember, there are several novels continuing Ender's story, and even more in the Shadow and Formic War series. With so much material, the franchise could work better as a television series instead of a feature film franchise. Hey, it worked out pretty well for Game of Thrones. In fact, shortly after the movie released in theaters, Variety reported that the studio was considering a TV spin-off instead of a sequel. Since there were issues getting the necessary money for the first movie, and it didn't do so well at the box office, it makes sense for the studio to look at other options. Unfortunately, there haven't been any updates on the TV front since that report in 2013. So, who knows if it'll ever happen.
Sinister is one of the better big-budget horror movies in recent memory, and nobody was surprised when this Blumhouse film got the sequel treatment in 2015. But since then, there hasn't been so much as a whisper about a third chapter. Instead, it looks like the whole Sinister series has been abandoned in favor of other franchises. Why does sequel-happy Hollywood want nothing more to do with Bagul and his box of haunted videos? Let's roll the tape. Sinister 2 didn't make enough cash. Producer Jason Blum knows a thing or two about getting a series off the ground. He's the man who made one-off movies like Paranormal Activity, Insidious, and The Purge into successful multi-film franchises. But when asked about the prospect of a third Sinister movie during a Facebook live chat in 2016, Blum was brutally honest, saying, "We didn't do well enough with Sinister 2. Not enough people went to see Sinister 2 to make Sinister 3, which is really sad." If you're wondering what sad looks like in terms of cold hard numbers, the original Sinister made $77 million on a $3 million budget. The sequel, which cost more than 3 times as much to make, brought in only $52 million. Critics tore the second film apart. So why did audiences not latch on to Sinister 2 the way they did for the original? Not to be blunt, but probably because it was a bad movie, at least according to critics. Wesley Morris of Grantland summed it up best, writing, "There comes a point when you have to say no to these horror sequels. There's no skill or idea visible anywhere, just the sound of money being sucked from your pockets." And he wasn't alone. Even critics who liked the first Sinister movie thought this one was cheap, unbelievable, and most of all, unnecessary. The sequel botched the best part. Like the first movie, Sinister 2 centers around a series of snuff films, each involving the grisly murder of what appears to be an entire family. And in the first film, these sequences were so disturbing that it kind of felt like we shouldn't even be seeing them, which made it a highly effective horror movie, if not the source of a few recurring nightmares. But in Sinister 2, the murder films looked more like crudely shot B-movies, screened with a bargain bin horror soundtrack that took them over the line from creepy to cheesy. With the scariest part of Sinister effectively ruined by the sequel, it's no surprise that Hollywood preferred not to unbox any future home videos from Bagul. They killed the premise and the whole cast. After the original Sinister ended with a huge reveal that the movie's snuff films were made by kids who killed their own families while under the influence of an ancient boogeyman, Sinister 2 tried to do something different. With the source of the movies no longer a mystery, the sequel took a new angle, focusing on one kid as he's courted by the ghostly squad of child murderers who want him to join their ranks, and taking all the mystery out of the premise that made Sinister scary in the first place. Oops. On top of that, both of these movies end with the deaths of virtually every major character, which is appropriately dark for a horror film, but not so good for a horror franchise. With nobody left alive to star in a new installment, Sinister 3 would have to start from scratch, creating a whole new set of characters to breathe life into a tired storyline. The monster is a bore. This is a problem that started with Sinister and never got fixed. Bagul is more than just an unpronounceable name, he's a lousy character too.
Some cultures believed that it lived in another realm, reachable only by ritual or sacrifice.
whatever that means. Both movies identify Bughuul, also known as the Boogeyman, as an otherworldly being who exists to corrupt innocent children. But as the antagonist of a major horror franchise, we never really get to know Bughuul, his hopes, his dreams, his reasons for dressing up like a low-rent Michael Jackson impersonator. Sure, he makes for a good jump scare, but without a compelling villain to shape the franchise around, making more Sinister movies would be a chore, especially when competing series like The Conjuring are trotting out fresh, interesting monsters with legitimate backstories on the regular. The original director has moved on. Sinister director Scott Derrickson doesn't do generic horror, and he's especially good at translating classic subject matter into something freshly terrifying.
You speak Latin, huh?
That would make him the perfect person to get this spooky series back on track, if only he had the time for it. But Derrickson let someone else take the reins when it came to directing Sinister 2, and by the time the sequel hit theaters, he was already on to bigger things, specifically the Marvel movie Doctor Strange, which catapulted him into a whole new world of big-budget, high-profile projects. Between adapting Bong Joon-ho's Snowpiercer into a TV series, and probably helming the inevitable Doctor Strange sequel, Derrickson has plenty on his plate, and he isn't likely to waste his energy trying to bring small-budget Bughuul and his squad of killer kiddos back from the dead, or wherever they are. So when it comes to more Sinister sequels, it looks like the hero from Sinister 2 gets the last word.
It's over, Zach. You're not making him a film.
Based on the series of popular Saturday Night Live sketches about metalhead Wayne Campbell and his shy best friend Garth, 1992's Wayne's World was a smash hit and a cultural phenomenon. It spawned catchphrases galore.
Swing!
Swing!
And put Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody back on the pop charts. The respectable Wayne's World 2 was released in 1993, and that was just about it from Wayne and Garth. Will there ever be a Wayne's World 3? Here's an extreme close-up on why it will never happen. Get the net. Sequel slump. Paramount Pictures, the studio behind Wayne's World, presumably lost a lot of interest in a third installment after taking a look at the box office receipts for Wayne's World 2. While it certainly has its funny and memorable moments, it didn't quite capture the magic of the original. Critics thought it was fine, but not as good as the first Wayne's World, and it only made $47 million at the domestic box office, which was far less impressive than the original's $121 million take.
No stairway. Denied.
It all added up to a lack of evident demand for Wayne's World 3, and Hollywood wasn't going to put up the tens of millions of dollars required to make it happen. Sister slowdowns. After the phenomenal success of Wayne's World, a slew of full-length movies based on Saturday Night Live sketches and characters were released, and not one of them managed to come anywhere near the box office bucks the first Wayne's World earned. Coneheads, It's Pat, Stuart Saves His Family, Blues Brothers 2000, A Night at the Roxbury, Superstar, and The Ladies' Man were all SNL-inspired duds that made a combined total of $111 million in theaters, less than Wayne's World amassed by itself. The subgenre died until 2010, when Will Forte's MacGyver send-up MacGruber hit theaters, and bombed. So, overall, there just hasn't been much of a demand for movies based on sketches people can watch at home for free, and that includes more Wayne's World. Getting busy. The late 90s or early noughts would have been the right time to strike quickly with another Wayne's World movie, but Mike Myers was simply too busy with other projects. After Wayne's World 2, Myers regrouped and came up with another over-the-top irresistible character, Austin Powers, a British spy straight out of a candy-colored 60s British spy movie.
Yeah, baby!
The first movie in the series, Austin Powers International Man of Mystery, was a modest hit, but built up such a huge home video following that the 1999 sequel, Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me, made more than $200 million at the box office. The third movie, 2002's Austin Powers and Goldmember, did even better, making those movies along with voicing the main character in the Shrek series and taking roles in films like 54 and Mystery, Alaska, didn't leave a lot of time for Myers to do much else. Family Feud. The success of Austin Powers can be partially blamed for why there was never a third Wayne's World movie. The character of Dr. Evil parodied several James Bond villains, particularly the similar-looking Blofeld of You Only Live Twice. But his clipped speaking voice, distant demeanor, and some physical mannerisms, including extending his pinky finger while talking, may have also been inspired by Dana Carvey's around the studio impression of their old SNL boss, Lorne Michaels.
That thing.
Yeah.
And then, when I saw Mike do it, I did kind of go,
That, along with other issues, drove a wedge between the two actors, who didn't speak for years as a result of their tiff. Happily, they've since made up and have appeared at Wayne's World screenings and on SNL together. Health matters. Carvey wasn't physically available to make Wayne's World 3 when it would have most logically entered production, sometime in the mid to late 90s. Nor was he able to do much work at all. He had some major health problems. Experiencing chest pains, Carvey went to a doctor, where it was discovered that blood wasn't properly flowing to his heart.
Hey, come here. Look at this x-ray. Your heart looks like a pig's ass. Look at that thing.
Carvey underwent several operations to correct the disorder, including a botched operation where his doctor fixed the wrong artery, but has since made a full recovery. Not interested. Probably the biggest reason why Wayne's World 3 has never happened is that Mike Myers doesn't seem to want to do it all that much. In 2008, Myers and Dana Carvey appeared as Wayne and Garth at the MTV Movie Awards, leaving many fans to wonder if a third big screen outing was in the offing. But Myers said he did it mainly to get caught up with his old friend Carvey. 3 years later, Carvey hosted Saturday Night Live and brought in Myers for a Wayne's World sketch. That reportedly sparked something in Myers, because in 2012, sources reported that he'd written a screenplay for Wayne's World 3, but Myers' team sent out a notice to refute it all, claiming he hadn't completed a script, nor was he even working on one. Myers and Carvey played Wayne and Garth again for the SNL 40 special in 2015. It sparked movie rumors that Myers good-naturedly shrugged off. When asked by the Canadian press if there were more Wayne's World films in the future, he said he was open to the idea, but that we shouldn't hold our breath, explaining, "It would be an interesting examination of Wayne at 50. I don't know what it would look like, but the idea of it makes me laugh, and Dana and I had a blast at the 40th anniversary, so I don't know." A walking nightmare and a machete-wielding killer clashed 20 years ago in Freddy vs. Jason, and fans have been begging for a sequel ever since. Here's why it hasn't happened yet. The Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th franchises were both popular, profitable series in the 80s and 90s. Freddy's last film was almost a decade earlier, and the previous Jason flick had been a flop. So when Freddy vs. Jason landed in 2003, combining them into a crossover film, it re-energized both characters and wound up pulling in the highest box office gross for both franchises. With an estimated $116 million haul on a $30 million budget, it was a huge moneymaker, and you'd think that it would have led to a second crossover. Unfortunately, attempts to get a Freddy vs. Jason sequel have been stalled for years. It wasn't helped by the fact that both franchises opted to reboot their respective series, with a new Friday the 13th arriving in 2009, and a remake of Nightmare on Elm Street a year later. Neither were successful enough to warrant follow-ups. At the same time, the movie rights to Jason and the Friday the 13th series were soon caught in a complicated legal web that has never been cleared up. Attempts to make a sequel to Freddy vs. Jason went further than just pairing up the two villains for a second bout. However, looking for a fresh spin, the studio tried adding a third character, and it seems that they settled on one in particular. Ash Williams from Evil Dead, played by Bruce Campbell, the chainsaw-wielding warrior, would have matched up well against the machete and claws of Jason and Freddy. The idea actually stems from an Easter egg in Jason Goes to Hell, where a copy of the Necronomicon from Evil Dead is implied to be responsible for Jason's power. According to a sci-fi interview with that film's director, Adam Marcus, he was, quote, setting up a mythology that Jason's mom wanted her son back so badly that she reads from the Necronomicon and brings about the resurrection of her son. As a result, the notion to cross all three franchises together seemed like a natural fit. Unfortunately, getting the rights to both Freddy and Jason was hard enough, but wrangling Evil Dead on top of it proved nearly impossible. Bruce Campbell, meanwhile, wasn't all that excited about the concept, and eventually he walked away. He said on Reddit, "I'm not real interested in crossovers. One of the main reasons why Ash vs. Jason vs. Freddy did not come to pass is because we couldn't control any other character other than Ash. That felt like a creatively bankrupt way to go."
This guy's behind everything.
Wow, there's an overstatement. Say what?
As the rumors of a three-way battle with Ash in a sequel gained steam, the film's director, Ronnie Yu, addressed the gossip in 2004. Speaking to Creature Corner about the possibility of merging the three franchises, he said, "That's something that the studio came up with. They asked me and all the fans wanted me to do it as well. So I said, yes, show me the script. I would definitely do it. They're still working on the script. I haven't seen anything." Sadly, Yu's jab at the long development time was frighteningly prescient, and nothing has yet to come of it some 20 years later. And he's not the only one who's been frustrated by the lack of movement. The original film's writers, Damian Shannon and Mark Swift, are still holding out for a sequel to come to fruition. In 2020, they tweeted, "We still want it to get made." As for the cast, Freddy actor and star Robert Englund expressed his regret that they didn't do a sequel while chatting with 2Fab in 2020. He said, "I think that remakes were rushed. I know the remake on A Nightmare on Elm Street was premature. We should have done another Freddy vs. Jason film and then waited. They should have waited for 5 or 10 years. As we've already discussed, one of the reasons a sequel hasn't come yet is that both franchises have since seen clean slate reboots. New actors were brought in, with Jackie Earle Haley putting on the striped sweater to play Freddy and future Swamp Thing actor Derek Mears donning the hockey mask as Jason. Though the 2009 version of Friday the 13th did okay-ish at the box office, neither film got a sequel of its own. But one of the ideas thrown around by fans is to essentially do what both franchises did in 2003. They want to create a crossover mashup movie to re-energize both series at the same time. Recent wild rumors and fans' desires aside, there's some logic to the notion. Even if it's unlikely that we'd get Ash Williams, a battle between the rebooted killers could be a winning idea with the right script, a solid director, and perhaps some legacy actors from both franchises returning to make a splash. In fact, during a 2008 conversation with MTV, Derek Mears even said he'd love to do a Freddy vs. Jason sequel. Although at the time, Jackie Earle Haley hadn't been publicly announced for the Nightmare reboot yet, and Mears was saying how he'd love to throw down against Robert Englund.
I have been away from my children for far too long.
Unlike most sequels stuck in development hell, we know a lot about what the sequel to Freddy vs. Jason would have been about. That's because in 2004, Bloody Disgusting actually published a screen treatment on their website for all to see. It was a version that incorporated Ash Williams, and it begins where Army of Darkness and Freddy vs. Jason left off. Ash is searching for the Necronomicon. The town of Crystal Lake has been redeveloped, and Jason's house where the book resides is to be torn down. According to the treatment, Freddy is clinging to life inside Jason's mind, and the film opens with Laurie Campbell and Will Rollins returning to Crystal Lake to make sure both villains are truly dead. After a frightening quick kill sequence, we meet our heroes, a group of teens working at a new S-Mart, the store where Ash works, built in the new Crystal Lake. But when Jason learns of the Necronomicon, he plans to use it to free Freddy from his mind and resurrect his mother. He's not the only one who knows the book is in Crystal Lake though, and Ash has arrived to find it too, leading him into a showdown with both Freddy and Jason, with the help of his fellow S-Mart employees. Ultimately, Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash would have turned the two villains into reluctant allies while sending in Bruce Campbell's Ash to stop them both. Unfortunately, one of the biggest reasons that a sequel hasn't happened to this point is that actor Robert Englund, the only man to portray Freddy Krueger until 2010, is no longer interested in playing the character.
I won't don the fedora or strap on the claws again because I'm just a little too old.
Englund doubled down on this in 2023, telling Variety, "I'm too old and thick to play Freddy now. I just can't do fight scenes for more than one take anymore. I've got a bad neck and bad back and arthritis in my right wrist, so I have to hang it up, but I'd love to cameo." However, the horror actor did suggest that Kevin Bacon might make for a good Freddy, saying the way he moves might be perfect for the part. With all that said, however, if the screen treatment that had been leaked by Bloody Disgusting had ever been made, we know it would have starred Englund and Bruce Campbell, as well as Monica Keena and Jason Ritter, returning as survivors Laurie and Will. Keena even addressed the possibility recently while talking with the podcast Happy Horror Time, revealing that both she and Ritter had options for a sequel in their contract for the first film. Of course, it's also likely that Ken Kersinger would have reprised his role as Jason too, and he may even still be up for a return if somehow a Freddy vs. Jason follow-up could ever be made. He made this clear during an appearance at a panel during the Spookala horror convention in 2022, saying, "If they ask me to do that, I'll be very happy to come back." It's been 2 decades since Freddy vs. Jason first hit theaters, but what you might not know is that there is indeed a continuation of the story, just not on film. The crossover sequel took place in comic book form, a joint production between DC Comics imprint Wildstorm and New Jersey-based independent publisher Dynamite Entertainment. Titled Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash, the 6-issue miniseries was published in 2007 and written by James Kahoric from a story by Jeff Katz, the writer of the planned movie. Following that original treatment, more or less, the story sees Freddy resurrected by Jason through the use of the Necronomicon. At the same time, Ash Williams arrives in Crystal Lake looking for the cursed book, and an epic battle ensues, with Freddy resurrecting all of Jason's previous victims as deadites that Ash must slay. But what makes this sequel so unique is that it even received a sequel of its own, Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash the Nightmare Warriors, published in 2009, and once again written by Kahoric based on a story from Katz. This time around, the US government tries to control Freddy and Jason's powers, only to unleash them once again on an unsuspecting populace. Then it's up to Ash to join forces with former survivors of both Mad Men to bring them down and save the world. Given that Freddy vs. Jason brought together 2 iconic horror franchises, it makes sense that it amassed a bigger audience than either had achieved alone. Even after 20 years of frustration, fans are still hoping that they'll finally get a chance to see Freddy and Jason together again.
The only thing to fear is fear himself.
Over on Change.org, a petition to get a Freddy vs. Jason sequel collected signatures from thousands of supporters who were hoping to get Hollywood's attention. While nothing came of it, it did show just how passionate the movie's fans are. Likewise, over on Reddit, Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash often pops up in discussions of horror sequels fans still want to see, and it remains a hot topic of conversation to this day. Even the press is still in love, with articles, podcasts, and websites continuing to publish discussions that ponder the possibilities of a Part 2 even decades later. There are many challenges to overcome to make a Freddy vs. Jason sequel happen. A new story and script will have to be assembled given Bruce Campbell's disinterest in a crossover, and Robert Englund will have to be convinced to return or be replaced by a new Freddy. The legal rights to the Friday the 13th series will have to be cleared up, which is no easy feat, while the studio will have to be convinced that such a crossover 20 years later can still work. But even with all that in mind, there's definitely a way it can happen. When it comes to the legal problems, studios have shown that when there's money to be made and a blockbuster to be produced, there's not much they won't do to get the rights they need to make it happen. For proof, look no further than Sony's unprecedented deal with Marvel to incorporate Spider-Man into the MCU. We admit it's probably a long shot with everything that's working against it, but it's what the fans clearly crave. And with crossovers and cinematic universes all the rage, it could stand to make big box office bucks.
There have to be more tombs out there in need of raiding, so why didn't 2018's Tomb Raider ever lead to another adventure? You can thank Amazon for that. Tomb Raider was one of the hottest video game series of the 1990s, centering on Lara Croft, a relic hunting adventurer. The first film adaptation of the Tomb Raider franchise was Angelina Jolie's 2001 adventure flick. It earned a healthy $273 million at the box office, a solid take for a turn-of-the-millennium action movie, and enough to get a sequel quickly greenlit. In 2018, the baton was passed to Alicia Vikander's Tomb Raider reboot, and it earned almost the exact same amount, yet there's been no follow-up since. But the reason why is more complicated than ticket sales. A sequel was in the works for a 2021 release, but it quickly hit a snag with the outbreak of COVID-19 in early 2020, just as things were apparently ramping up. Vikander was repeatedly asked about the sequel, and in a chat with Collider in 2021, she seemed unsure if it was still going to happen, explaining, "Pre-COVID, I would have said yes. And now I think it's a yes still. It's not greenlit, but the script is in the making, and I think everyone is excited, and I would love to revisit Lara again." Those delays may have cost them a sequel, because in 2022, Amazon acquired MGM, which forced the franchise into a complicated legal limbo, and the rights lapsed. An anonymous studio source told The Wrap there was a pre-negotiated ticking clock that had been agreed to, and there was no way to rescue it in time. MGM asked the rights holders for more time, but their patience had run out. Even though Tomb Raider was met with decidedly mixed reviews upon its release, it has achieved a mild cult status with fans who would love to see Vikander back as Lara Croft in a second movie. And it seems the filmmakers and its cast would love nothing more than to reunite for another go. In 2021, Lovecraft Country creator Misha Green signed up to write and direct a sequel.
Howdy Tomb Raider fans, my name is Misha Green and I'm the writer-director of the upcoming Tomb Raider movie.
Vikander seemed particularly pumped about the prospect of working with her, telling Entertainment Weekly in 2021, "I hope we go and make another movie. Because of the pandemic, we had plans of shooting this film, and now it's been 1.5 years. But Misha Green is on board, and she's writing a draft right now." Ever hopeful, Vikander seemed ready to strap on the guns and get back to adventuring, adding, "It would be so amazing if we get to go and do this very big-ass film together, going to kick some ass in front of the camera and behind the camera." A year later, though, Vikander's tone shifted, and she cautioned that the odds were stacked against them, telling MovieZine in 2022, "I'm good at going back to that role, and it would mean a lot of training. Now it's a lot of talk considering that Amazon has bought MGM, and after the pandemic, there is so much politics. So right now, I actually do not really know what is happening." If there's going to be a Tomb Raider sequel, it would of course have to star Alicia Vikander. As far back as 2019, with the sequel already in early development, there wasn't actually concrete word on whether Vikander would reprise the role, with people reporting that it was still unclear whether she'd be back. But that question was answered when the actress officially signed up, and she began speaking about the sequel publicly. Sadly, most of her comments were regarding its long delay. Beyond Vikander, there isn't much known about who else from the cast might have reappeared in this proposed sequel, though an unverified report in 2020 did suggest that Kristen Scott Thomas would return and that she'd have a much meatier role. The actress had played a smaller part as Anna Miller, Laura's mentor and a colleague of her father in the 2018 film. Anna is a bigger bad in the video games, and according to the rumor, she would have been bumped up to the main villain for the sequel, which had been teased at the close of the first film.
You can pick up where he left off.
Tomb Raider was helmed in 2018 by a relatively unknown Norwegian filmmaker named Roar Uthaug, who a few years later directed the cult hit Troll. The script was penned by Geneva Robertson Dworet in her feature film debut, alongside co-writers Evan Darty and Alistair Siddons. Robertson Dworet went on to work on Captain Marvel, but neither she nor Uthaug were expected to return for the second Tomb Raider film after it began development. Instead, writer Amy Jump was signed in 2019 to pen the second film, and Ben Wheatley inked a deal to sit in the director's chair. But as the delays on the film began to pile up, the studio made significant changes to the crew behind the camera, which saw both Amy Jump and Ben Wheatley dismissed from the project. Replacing them was Misha Green, who was announced to both write and direct the sequel in 2021, though no reason was given as to the swap in filmmakers. Nevertheless, Green got right to work, and by May, she was telling her following on Twitter that the first draft of the script was complete, but that there was still a long journey to production. Long, in this instance, was a hell of an understatement.
You might as well tie a stone to your foot and jump off the boat now.
Though it took more than a year after Tomb Raider was released before the studio was ready to commit to a sequel, they finally did put the wheels in motion in 2019. In fact, rumor has it that the Tomb Raider sequel came fairly close to beginning production. A November 2019 report from HN Entertainment claimed that Vikander was signed on, the script was ready to go, and the studio was locking down locations for shooting. Per that same report, which was seemingly never confirmed by any of the major trades, MGM Studios was preparing to bring the production back to the UK, where much of the first movie was filmed. Warner Brothers' Leavesden Studios was even said to be the place where they would set up shop for the sequel before it all fell apart. What's known for a fact is that this version of the movie was supposed to start shooting in early 2020, although pandemic-related shutdowns forced the project to be put on hold, and then its release date was taken off the calendar altogether. It wouldn't be until 2021 that it got back up and running. By then, Green was the writer and director of record, and her version of the film was also further along than some fans may realize. As it happens, it even had a title, Tomb Raider Obsidian, and Vikander was expressing excitement over an imminent production start that never came. Nobody but those involved know what the sequel would have been about when it was under the stewardship of writer Amy Jump and director Ben Wheatley. However, some word has trickled out over the years of what might have happened in the version written by Green, cobbled together from various tidbits that leaked during its development and after the film was shuttered. In addition to talk that Kristen Scott Thomas would return in a bigger role as the main villain of the film, audiences also got a brief glimpse of some of the action in late 2022. When storyboard artist Jake Lunt Davies posted a series of images that he'd created for the project on Twitter. What they revealed didn't give away too much of the plot, but they did showcase a pulse-pounding sequence that may have kicked off the story, with a daring attack on Croft Manor carried out by shadowy agents. Given the ending of the 2018 Tomb Raider and the rumored larger role for Anna Williams, it's possible this raid was orchestrated by Lara Croft's mentor, sparking a quest that would take her to various locations to get to the truth. If there's anything still standing in the way of a direct sequel to 2018's Tomb Raider, it isn't the pandemic, problems with the script, or scheduling with the actors. Instead, it's the fact that a reboot to the franchise was announced in early 2023. This stems from MGM's loss of the rights following their acquisition by Amazon, with an apparent bidding war taking place for the chance to start from scratch.
Blockbuster news shaking Hollywood this morning. Amazon buying MGM Studios for $8.5 billion.
The winners of that bidding war were, of course, Amazon, who quickly announced grand plans for a total reboot of the movie with a new actor taking over for Vikander. The deal was a big one for the streaming service, which includes much more than just the rights to make a feature film. And while numbers weren't announced, The Hollywood Reporter suggested it only fell a little short of their gargantuan deal for The Lord of the Rings. The announcement came on the heels of the news that Amazon would be getting into the video game publishing business, and it would be putting out the next Tomb Raider console game from developer Crystal Dynamics. Details at this time are still sketchy, with no writer announced for the film, let alone a director or star. But that doesn't mean that Amazon hasn't started work on the project, and they have, in fact, made bigger plans that could see an explosion of Tomb Raider across multiple media platforms. After snagging the rights to a Tomb Raider adaptation, the folks at Amazon have revealed they'll be crafting a big-screen reboot. But that isn't all. The film will be just one part of a larger tapestry, and they have plans to turn the franchise into a full-fledged cinematic universe. To make that happen, they have announced that a Tomb Raider TV series is in the works as a streaming original, with plans for the show and film to be tightly integrated with both each other and the already announced video game relaunch. Even more exciting is that spearheading the effort behind the scenes will be Phoebe Waller-Bridge, the three-time Emmy Award-winning creator and writer of Fleabag, star of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, and co-writer of the 2021 James Bond film No Time to Die. According to the trade, Waller-Bridge will write the series, but is unlikely to be involved in the film. And while many fans may have jumped to the conclusion that she might play Lara Croft too, that doesn't appear to be the case. One actor who has stepped up to volunteer for the title role is Michaela J. Rodriguez, who told Variety, "I would like to tackle a role like Lara Croft. I would love to do that because I have the badassness and sex appeal to make people love it. If not, I would also love to be Lara Croft's right-hand girl who gets just as much airtime and is right next to her killing it." With a cinematic universe on its way that will reboot the franchise with an all-new cast and crew, it might seem like a sequel to 2018's Tomb Raider has no chance of ever seeing the light of day. But if one steps back and takes stock of the Hollywood landscape, they'll see that a return to that universe isn't really far-fetched, and it could actually still happen, even if it's not anytime soon. After all, recent films like Spider-Man No Way Home and The Flash have seen the return of actors who audiences thought they'd said goodbye to decades ago, with both Tobey Maguire and Michael Keaton returning as Spider-Man and Batman.
Versus Angelina Jolie. That would be a cool film.
And while there's very, very little chance that Amazon would use a multiverse gimmick to have previous Lara Crofts meet, although that's what studios all seem to think the fans want, the idea of returning to the continuity of a previous movie even after a reboot isn't without precedent itself. The Terminator and Halloween franchises both did just that, after all. From the sounds of it, even star Alicia Vikander would still be up for reprising the role years down the line. Vikander told Variety in 2023, "For me, that was another one of those childhood dreams. To portray an action character was awesome and beyond what I ever thought I would do. And I think the physical part is something that I really enjoyed. So yeah, if another opportunity like that came again, I'll be interested."
Okay, so maybe we'll never get to see Galaxy Quest 2, but by Grabthar's hammer, it will be avenged. Galaxy Quest is a rare breed of cult classic sci-fi comedy, one that still holds up more than 20 years after its release. David Mamet, for instance, famously included it alongside The Godfather and A Place in the Sun as one of the only flawless movies in existence. Even the most obvious targets of its biting satire hold the film in high esteem. George Takei once called it a powerful piece of documentary filmmaking. And Patrick Stewart claimed, "No one laughed louder or longer in the cinema than I did." While the film didn't quite set any box office records, earning around $90 million on a $45 million budget, it spent the next couple of decades picking up momentum, becoming a staple in every nerd's Blu-ray collection. Considering that Hollywood has developed a perma-crush on nostalgia-based sequels, Galaxy Quest seems like prime real estate for a reboot, remake, or re-something. Asked by MTV News whether or not they'd come back for another round, Sigourney Weaver pointed out that she still has her costume, while Sam Rockwell simply said, "Yeah." Even Tim Allen was pitching story ideas.
Whew! Your commander is on deck.
So why haven't we been back to the NSEA Protector since 1999? The answer, sadly, is that we've come close more than once, but a confluence of bad luck has kept Galaxy Quest 2 from reaching our screens. Here's how it went down. By 2015, Galaxy Quest had firmly cemented its place in popular culture. and interested parties started priming the pump for another go-round. The idea was actually to create a streaming series as a follow-up to the original film. It was reported at the time that Amazon Studios had begun development on the project in conjunction with Paramount. The show was even greenlit directly to series, suggesting that it was at one point a sure thing.
By Grabthar's hammer. What a savings.
These plans were short-lived, however, as in January of 2016, Galaxy Quest star Alan Rickman died at age 69 from pancreatic cancer. Sam Rockwell saw this, along with Tim Allen's difficult-to-pass availability, as a death knell for the project. Then in 2017, Deadline reported that Amazon was still developing the series, with Paul Scheer on board as head writer.
The show must go on.
This incarnation was paused for what was initially supposed to be a year, reportedly the result of Paramount TV president Amy Powell's exit from her post. Word of a potential sequel eventually resurfaced in January of 2021, when Tim Allen stated that a new entry in the series was effectively in limbo. He told Entertainment Weekly, "We talk about it all the time. There is constantly a little flicker of butane torch that we could reboot it with." Translation:
Never give up, never surrender.
On April 18, 2023, Paramount Plus announced that a new Galaxy Quest TV series is currently in the works for the streaming service. However, it has yet to be confirmed whether this new show will reboot the original film's story or serve as a long-awaited sequel to the landmark sci-fi comedy. Currently, the only name attached to this new version of Galaxy Quest is Mark Johnson, who worked as a producer on the prior film, and will likewise produce this upcoming project. For what it's worth, Tim Allen told comicbook.com about a Galaxy Quest 2 script he believed could still see the light of day, as recently as November of 2022. Nevertheless, with details on this new show so scarce, it remains unclear if Paramount Plus is finally realizing Allen's vision for a sequel or taking the franchise in a different direction entirely.
A coming-of-age movie with a superhero twist, Sky High left a lasting impression on both kids and former kids. So why has a sequel never seen the light of day? Debuting in theaters the same year as Batman Begins and 1 year after Spider-Man 2, Sky High was poised to become as big a blockbuster as either of those other films. Disney, still years away from purchasing comic book juggernaut Marvel, may even have been banking on it. But when it arrived, it wasn't the smash hit studio execs were hoping for.
This is so unfair. If life were to suddenly get fair, I doubt it would happen in high school.
While the film did more than double its modest budget, it didn't crack $100 million worldwide. That left Hollywood cool on the idea of a sequel, and since then, the cast and crew have gone on to have bigger, more prosperous careers. Kurt Russell has made a resurgence largely thanks to his role in Quentin Tarantino's The Hateful Eight, while Mary Elizabeth Winstead became a star thanks to 2010's Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. On television, Daniel Panabaker became a different superhero on the CW's The Flash, while Nicholas Braun garnered a pair of Emmy nominations thanks to his role in the HBO drama Succession. Getting the gang back together may not be such an easy feat, but there have been plenty of rumors over the years implying that such an event could still happen. Just because Sky High wasn't a huge box office success doesn't mean that it has no die-hard fans. On the contrary, it's managed to develop a fan base containing both comic book fans and Disney lovers, and those involved with the film continue to be asked about the possibility of more stories set in its universe to this very day. In 2020, writer Mark McCorkle, who is also the co-creator of Kim Possible and has since written The Penguins of Madagascar and Big Hero 6 the series, spoke about a potential follow-up to the 2005 film. He told Inverse, "Over the years, we always thought maybe a sequel could happen one of these days. There was always a belief that this was a rich enough world to keep going with new ideas. I guess if the film still has that same affection of people watching it and streaming it on Disney+, who knows? Maybe if the people speak, their wishes will be answered." McCorkle isn't the only one hoping for Sky High 2. Daniel Panabaker, who portrayed the plant-loving pacifist Layla, told the International Business Times in 2018, "I would do anything to make another one." Mary Elizabeth Winstead, who played the techno-baby-themed supervillain Royal Pain, doesn't seem to think her story is over either. When asked about the character's future on the Ladies' Night podcast, she said, "I think she's still operating as a supervillain for sure. I don't think there was any moral reassessment for her actions." Winstead even joked that instead of reverting everyone back into babies, Royal Pain would spend the sequel turning innocent students into senior citizens.
Patience! We've waited this long. When the time is right, we'll have our revenge.
With so many years having passed since Sky High was in theaters, it's fair to ask who would actually return if a sequel was greenlit. While not everyone has directly addressed their possible return, there are a few who have, and thankfully Michael Angarano is one of them. Angarano, who played lead character Will Stronghold, told Ultimate Disney not long after the first film's release, "I would be up for a sequel for sure, especially if everyone from this film was also involved." But would everyone else be involved? Danielle Panabaker seems to think so based on comments she made in 2018. She elaborated, "I just saw Nick Braun and Michael Angarano at a party in LA, and I love those boys so much. I would see Mary Elizabeth Winstead when we were both working in Vancouver. I think it would be great, and I think we would all jump at the opportunity." The students of Sky High aren't the only ones interested in continuing the story. Actor Kevin Heffernan, who played bus driver Ron Wilson, was quick to affirm that he would absolutely return for a sequel. At a press junket for another film, he gushed, "I would love to. I mean, the cast is amazing. The array of people in that cast is phenomenal." Even though there's been no concrete talk of a Sky High sequel since the first movie was released, that doesn't mean that those involved haven't had ideas regarding where the story should go. In 2019, director Mike Mitchell opened up about his concept for Sky High 2, including a proposed title. Mitchell told IO9, "I am hugely proud of it, and they should make it a franchise. We have a whole sequel that's called Save You, or Save University." From the sounds of it, the sequel would have sent the young heroes off to college, where they surely would have met even more young men and women training to become the world's next defenders of humanity. Mitchell isn't the only one with fun ideas of where the story could go. More recently, Danielle Panabaker shared her thoughts on a different story, one that takes into account the long amount of time that has passed since the first movie. She elaborated, "I'd like to think that maybe they're teachers at Sky High because it's been long enough that they could go back and teach. They could be the young, cool, hip teachers, and then they're teaching the next class of superheroes." With efforts to get a cinematic sequel to Sky High having stalled for years, it's worth asking if the creators should be looking at other ways to bring a follow-up to life. While they could continue the story in comic form the way shows like Smallville and Firefly have, they could also opt for television. That was apparently once on the drawing board, as director Mike Mitchell revealed during an interview with Gizmodo in 2019. According to the filmmaker, the studio originally had bigger plans than just movies, as he explained. Except for Kurt Russell and Kelly Preston, every actor signed a contract to make it into a TV show.
It's nice to know that whatever happens to me, you'll still be around to save the world.
Looking forward to it.
Disney presumably wanted Sky High to become a TV hit on their very own Disney Channel, led by the young cast rather than pricier big-screen stars. However, the movie's unremarkable performance at the box office left it overshadowed by other family films like March of the Penguins and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Could a TV sequel still materialize? Mitchell isn't sure, but he's totally on board and just waiting for Disney to give the word. He joked, "Dude, I'm ready to go. It's up to you in the media. Just write that it's happening." It's been a long time since 2005, and the Disney Channel, along with pretty much every other cable network, is far from the juggernaut it once was. That hasn't stopped the massive company from producing plenty of content for their streaming service, Disney+, and the service might just be the perfect home for a Sky High sequel. Writer Mark McCorkle certainly thinks so. He told Inverse in 2020, "To me, it's a very natural fit for Disney+, and over the years, we always thought maybe a sequel could happen one of these days." That interview immediately sparked wild speculation that Disney was developing a Sky High sequel project for the streaming service. Even though nothing was ever confirmed and the rumors are still nothing more than rumors, it's not hard to imagine Sky High becoming a Disney Plus feature film series or episodic adventure. It could all happen on a relatively modest budget and would surely attract plenty of longtime fans. It may not have attracted lines of people around the block, but Sky High has become beloved by Disney fans for its bright, cheery tone and colorful, family-friendly action. Though many years have passed since the movie was released, enthusiasm for it and a possible sequel has never waned. On websites like Reddit and Twitter, fans of the original film express their love and call for a sequel nearly 2 decades later. In 2020, a petition to get a sequel up and running cropped up, complete with an idea on what it could be about. The fan proposed, 2020 marks the 15-year anniversary of the release of this smash hit, and we propose that the original cast and creators of Sky High reunite for a sequel depicting a high school reunion, featuring the characters we have all adored for well over a decade. Even though the petition didn't garner as much support as other fan-driven attempts to get movies made have, its mere existence demonstrates just how passionate Sky High fans are.
When life gives you lemons?
Make apple juice?
Can't make lemons. I don't know what it is.
Sky High may have been a little too far ahead of its time, striking when colorful superheroes were on their way out and darker, grittier superheroes were on their way in. It missed the era of the cinematic universe by a few years too, meaning that some may think that audiences have no interest in a Sky High sequel nowadays. But there's more reason to believe that the world needs a Sky High sequel now more than ever. In the last decade, superhero movies from Marvel and DC have gotten almost too popular for their own good, reaching a critical mass that has seen some audiences souring on their latest offerings. Marvel is engulfed in a complicated multiverse story, and their latest entries have been met with lackluster reception. Meanwhile, things got so bad for DC that they decided to reboot their cinematic universe entirely. Both have become so overwrought that, at times, it feels like all the fun has been sucked out of them. A Sky High sequel could be just the antidote. As Mike McCorkle said, Mike Mitchell had a vision of bright colors and it being friendly and upbeat. Sky High proved that you can be bright and colorful and still resonate with real human emotions. A throwback to a simpler era, a Sky High sequel could be the hopeful, optimistic, family-friendly superhero adventure that the movies have been missing.
From a sudden car accident to a disgraced Hollywood producer, there are several shocking reasons why Kill Bill Volume 3 never materialized, and why there's a good chance it never will. Kill Bill Volume 1 is the only one of Quentin Tarantino's movies to get a sequel, so why hasn't it received a threequel? If you're looking for a simple answer, it's that Tarantino is waiting for his stars to grow up a bit. From the very beginning, Tarantino has said that his plan for a potential Volume 3 requires the actors from the original films to be at least 15 years older. Not just the adults like Uma Thurman and Daryl Hannah, but also child actors Perla Haney Hardine and Ambrosia Kelly. The longer and more complicated answer is that Tarantino's style has evolved over the last 2 decades, and the projects he's made more recently look very different from Kill Bill. Death Proof, part of the 2007 double feature experiment Grindhouse, was the last of his films to have a certain Kill Bill vibe, mostly due to the performance of Thurman's stunt double Zoe Bell as a fictionalized version of herself. From 2009 onward, however, he moved forward with a very different series of revenge films, rewriting historical atrocities with Inglourious Basterds, Django Unchained, and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. A focus on the literary rather than the visionary has consumed Tarantino's output in the last decade, from the drawing room drama of The Hateful Eight to his novelization of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. As his self-imposed career clock is ticking down, it seems a strong possibility that another Kill Bill sequel just isn't something that interests Tarantino very much anymore. Journalists have been asking Quentin Tarantino about a possible Volume 3 for 2 decades, and the famously gabby director has happily obliged and gleefully fueled the rumors. In 2004, he referred to the possible series as his take on Sergio Leone's Dollars trilogy, and claimed that his initial plan was to make a sequel every 10 years. Once 10 years had actually passed, though, things had changed. While promoting The Hateful Eight in 2015, Tarantino told Variety, "I'm not committing to it, but I wouldn't be surprised if the bride made one more appearance before the whole thing is said and done." Tarantino has also repeatedly stated that he will direct only 10 films. Once he completes that 10th and final film, he will apparently retire from making movies. With every new release in the last few years, he's gotten closer to that self-imposed cutoff, and unless he breaks his vow or finds a loophole, it looks less and less likely that Kill Bill Volume 3 will be included in his filmography. The Kill Bill films are all about revenge, and they center around an important ethical question. Is a desire to seek retribution, to finish unfinished business, ever justified or merely a justification? Beatrix Kiddo sets out to destroy the people who destroyed her life, but she kills an awful lot of other people along the way. Bill even calls her out on it during their final confrontation.
All those people you killed to get to me felt damn good, didn't they?
The bride sliced through dozens of O-Ren Ishii's bodyguards, not for some high-minded act of cosmic balance, but because she enjoyed doing it. According to Tarantino, a third film would pick up the revenge theme for a new generation. Nikki Bell, daughter of former Deadly Viper Assassination Squad member Vernita Green, seeks revenge against the bride for the death of her mother. Raised and trained by the treacherous Sophie Fatale, whom Beatrix left maimed but alive, Nikki would set out for her own righteous vengeance, facing the bride along with her now-grown daughter Bibi Kiddo.
You can take my word for it. Your mother had it coming.
Back in 2007, series producer E. Bennett Walsh told the audience at the Shanghai Film Festival that the third, and potentially fourth film, might also feature a pair of former henchmen from the first movie, seeking their own revenge against the bride. The first two Kill Bill films leave precious few characters alive by the end, but there are a few actors that would be expected to return in a follow-up. First and foremost, of course, is Beatrix Kiddo herself, Uma Thurman. Julie Dreyfus could also return as Sophia Fatale, as well as Daryl Hannah as the bride's nemesis, Ellie Driver, left blinded but alive at the end of Kill Bill Volume 2. Several actors from the films have sadly died in the last 2 decades, including David Carradine and Sonny Chiba. The real question is who would play the now-grown Bibi and Nikki? Part of Quentin Tarantino's plan to wait 15 years was to give actor Ambrosia Kelly time to grow up. In 2004, he told Entertainment Weekly, "It's exciting to know that somewhere there's a little girl who will grow up to be my leading lady." However, Kelly hasn't acted on screen since 2012. And in 2023, Vivica A. Fox said in an interview with Variety that her dream casting for the role of Nikki would be Zendaya. As for Bibi, Perla Haney Hardine remains active in the business, and even had a small role in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. In recent years, though, a different candidate has emerged, Thurman's real-life daughter Maya Hawke, who's become a star in her own right. Quentin Tarantino has developed a routine company of sorts over the years, and for a while, Uma Thurman was not just a company player, but a muse and collaborator of the director. The two of them developed the character of the bride while working together on Pulp Fiction. After all, the Deadly Viper Assassination Squad sounds an awful lot like the crime-fighting team in Mia Wallace's TV pilot Fox Force 5.
Fox as in we're a bunch of foxy chicks. Force as in we're a force to be reckoned with. And 5 as in there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of us.
However, Thurman and Tarantino have not worked together since Kill Bill Volume 2 came out in 2004, and more than a decade later, one of the possible reasons why came to light. In a 2018 profile in the New York Times, Thurman stated that Tarantino had coerced her into doing an unauthorized automobile stunt. Instructed to drive a convertible down a winding path in Mexico at 40 miles per hour, Thurman lost control of the car and ran off the side of the road, resulting in a concussion and damage to her knees. Footage of the accident was released online after the story dropped, footage which, according to Thurman, Tarantino had fought for years to keep private. In an Instagram post accompanying the profile, Thurman acknowledged that Tarantino finally allowed her to release the footage and said that he feels remorseful about the incident. Even after making amends personally, the two have yet to collaborate again. In the Instagram post featuring footage of Uma Thurman's wreck, she wrote that while she feels the negligent stunt itself was not done with malicious intent, the 15-year cover-up of the accident very much was an act of malice. Thurman laid the blame not at Quentin Tarantino, but squarely at the feet of producers Lawrence Bender, E. Bennett Walsh, and Harvey Weinstein. That wasn't the only thing she accused Weinstein of either. In the 2018 New York Times profile, Thurman claimed that Weinstein sexually assaulted her on 2 different occasions in the 90s, and he threatened to end her career when she confronted him over his actions. She wasn't the only one, as other high-profile stars like Mira Sorvino and Selma Hayek also shared their harrowing stories with the powerful producer. Weinstein ran the Disney-affiliated indie distributor Miramax, and not only produced both Kill Bill movies, but championed and nurtured Tarantino's career from the very beginning. In return, Tarantino's works helped turn Miramax and Weinstein himself into a Hollywood power player and a household name. Tarantino worked with Weinstein on every one of his films, from Reservoir Dogs to The Hateful Eight in 2015. And even though he has since distanced himself from the disgraced executive, their longtime friendship casts a shadow over much of Tarantino's work. Kill Bill Volume 3 isn't the only long-awaited Kill Bill project that may never see the light of day. The official narrative from Miramax and Quentin Tarantino has always been that the 2 Kill Bill films were originally intended to be a single 4-hour movie, but it was split into 2 volumes in order to improve its chances at the box office. That may or may not be true. After all, the 2 films are very different from each other in style, and other than Uma Thurman, they have largely different casts. The idea that they were ever meant to form one coherent film is slightly dubious, but nevertheless, Tarantino has dangled the possibility of a combined feature called The Whole Bloody Affair for years. As of 2023, there have only been 2 confirmed public screenings of The Whole Bloody Affair. One was at the Cannes Film Festival in 2004, and the other was a 2-week run in 2011 at the New Beverly Cinema, the Los Angeles theater owned by Tarantino. Reports from those screenings confirm that the combined feature runs mostly the same as what the rest of the world already saw, but with a few differences. The epic fight between the bride and the Crazy 88 gang is presented entirely in color, and certain key scenes and lines have been cut. Despite these tantalizing details, there appear to be no plans to release it publicly again in theaters or on Blu-ray and streaming. In March 2023, Quentin Tarantino announced his next film, The Movie Critic, a 70s set drama about, you guessed it, a movie critic. When the movie Critic comes out, it will be Tarantino's 10th film, and his film career is supposedly finished after that. If the director follows through, that means lights out for Kill Bill Volume 3. Tarantino reinforced this idea in July 2023 while doing an interview with the Flemish newspaper De Morgan. When asked if Maya Hawke could play the bride's daughter in a third Kill Bill film, the auteur replied, "I don't see that. My last film was about a film critic, a male critic, and he plays in the 70s. If you're looking for the last word on the subject, that seems pretty final." However, don't give up all hope just yet, as Uma Thurman raised an intriguing possibility when she was asked about it in 2022. She told Fox 5 New York, "All I know is he's always said he's going to make 10, but it doesn't include if he does television. Could Volume 3 show up as a streaming series at some point, like Tarantino's expansion of The Hateful Eight for Netflix in 2019? We'll just have to wait and see whether or not he's decided to pull a little trick on his fans."
Silly rabbit. Tricks are for kids.
Even though rumors have circulated since 2004, it's been years since Kill Bill Volume 3 has had any significant movement. Maybe we actually will see it on the big or small screen at some point, with aged-up stars Perla Haney-Hardine and Ambrosia Kelly, or maybe Maya Hawke and Zendaya at each other's throats. Only time will tell at this point, but if the project never comes to pass, it will at least be in good company. Tarantino seems to enjoy talking about films he will never make as much as actually making films, and the last 3 decades are littered with would-be features that never grew beyond his imagination. For every Inglourious Bastards, there's a Double V Vega, which would have brought together John Travolta and Michael Madsen as their well-dressed Pulp Fiction and Reservoir Dogs characters. For every Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, there's a 60s set Casino Royale or an R-rated Star Trek sequel that sparks speculation and excitement before fizzling and fading away as he goes in a new direction. Kill Bill Volume 3 may only ever exist in our imaginations, but if it does happen against all odds, we know it'll be a bloody good time.
You'll float too, or will you? Nobody really knows whether we'll ever get to see It Chapter 3, but it's not looking great. Here's why. Since franchise potential is everything these days, many filmmakers end their stories with a hint that audiences might one day return to that world. However, It Chapter 2 stays largely faithful to the source material. Stephen King wrote the novel as a standalone story, with a definitive beginning, middle, and end. And the It film series respects these main beats, even if it takes creative liberties in other sections. In the end, the losers perform a ritual and tear out Pennywise's heart, bringing down the curtain on the unholy clown's reign of terror. Their victory isn't without a cost though, since Eddie dies of his wounds in the final battle, while the friends lost Stan early in the film. In the book, a devastating storm washes over Derry, but this event is missing from the movie, leaving the audience with a more hopeful end to the story. Looking at the narrative from an objective point of view, the story of It is over after Chapter 2. These characters have suffered, overcome, and prevailed after all is said and done. Ultimately, they have arrived at their final destination. While it might be tempting to start a new journey in It Chapter 3, there needs to be a truly compelling reason to revisit Derry and revive Pennywise, especially after he suffered such a final end. While it isn't unusual for different directors to helm various installments in a trilogy, It Chapter 3 wouldn't feel the same without Andy Muschietti. His vision for the series is unique, and his signature horror style can be felt in every part of the movies. To replace him would be akin to replacing the very soul of the film franchise. Unfortunately, Muschietti has never seen It as a 3-film franchise. Even after the incredible success of the 2017 film, the filmmaker explained how there was never any intention to stretch out the story longer than necessary. He told Variety how he had read about the trilogy idea, but insisted there was never any discussion about it. Muschietti said, "I understand why they would think that because New Line originally split up The Hobbit into 3 movies instead of 2. But to be honest, there wasn't a conversation about that, and now we are designing the story as one single film." It's also telling that the studio resisted the temptation to make an extra film and squeeze more money out of the franchise, especially after the impressive box office haul of the first movie.
That's a picture wrap on Bill Skarsgård that's given the hand.
A return to Derry wouldn't be complete without the return of Bill Skarsgård as Pennywise. While there was initially some debate surrounding whether Skarsgård would do the character justice, no one can dispute the actor put his own menacing twist on Stephen King's infamous demon. And despite having 2 It movies under his belt, it appears as if Skarsgård wasn't ready to let the dancing clown go yet either. After the release of It Chapter 2, Skarsgård revealed to Joe Blow how he and Andy Muschietti had discussed the possibility of a 3rd film. Both of them acknowledged how it would need to be an entirely original story, since they had mostly covered the events of the novel. Skarsgård said, "There are a few ideas floating around. I feel like I've done what I can with the incarnation of Pennywise as we know of him, so I think it would be a cool idea to change up a few things. So without going into too much detail, there is a story that we're kind of excited about, but it's way too early to say." Who knows the story of It better than anyone else? The author of the novel, of course, Stephen King. While a continuation of It has never materialized in the literary world, the writer has shown he isn't afraid of returning to his former stomping grounds when inspiration strikes. Most recently, he released Dr. Sleep, the sequel to 1977's The Shining, 36 years after the original. Many fans wonder if he will give It the same treatment, especially taking into account Pennywise's place in pop culture's zeitgeist. Appearing on Bloody Disgusting's Losers Club podcast, King acknowledged how Pennywise is closely tied to his own legacy as a writer, even joking about how the clown will one day eclipse him. That being said, he isn't itching to get back into this world.
Well, I don't have a relationship with Pennywise now because I have no intention of going back to It.
King revealed some further context about the upcoming Welcome to Derry series, stating it will be a prequel set before the events of the first movie and explore the backstory of Pennywise. The author wasn't opposed to the idea either, admitting there are more than a few intriguing storytelling possibilities to explore in the future. Gary Doberman has built up a formidable reputation as one of the hottest horror filmmakers in Hollywood. He wrote all of the Annabelle movies and even directed the third entry in the franchise, Annabelle Comes Home. Doberman also had a hand in shaping the direction of the It film series, co-writing the first film and taking on the whole screenplay for Chapter 2. Doberman also has his own ideas of how a potential It Chapter 3 could develop the story further and tackle King's rich lore. Speaking to comicbookmovie.com, Doberman discussed how the two movies are limited to how much mythology can be covered and insisted there is a lot more to explore, especially in terms of the antagonist. He said, "There are definitely elements of the novel you could expand on and make its own movie. It's just a question of whether or not people want to see it. But I do think It was on this planet for a very, very, very long time, and there's a lot of bloodshed and a lot of stories to tell, and I think you could do that for sure." For all intents and purposes, the cosmic entity known as It is dead. After the ritual in which Pennywise had his heart ripped out, this should be a done and dusted case of ding dong, the clown is gone. However, this is the horror genre, but death is anything but final. There are several ways of bringing back Pennywise, and it's up to the writers to figure out how. Regardless of how it's done, it's important to revive the main antagonist of the franchise, whether it comes back in the form of a clown or something else entirely. Considering the importance of 27-year intervals to the story, It's Chapter 3 should take place 27 years later. And in Derry, of course. Nobody in the Losers Club has any kids, so this could also be a chance to pass the mantle to a new group of characters to carry the story forward. Naturally, one or two of the original losers could return and help out, but a third installment should offer a brand new journey for brand new characters, not a rehash of what came before. So what would the cast look like for a third It movie? Well, if Andy Muschietti helms It's Chapter 3, it's obvious that there must be one name at the top of the cast list, Bill Skarsgård. Taking on this version of the story would feel strange without Skarsgård's involvement, even if he portrays another incarnation of the character.
Time to float.
In addition, it will be essential to bring back at least one of the surviving losers. In terms of sheer drawing power and star credentials, that instantly points to two actors, Jessica Chastain and James McAvoy. Considering that Chastain's Bev married Jay Ryan's Ben at the end of It Chapter 2, it's also likely that he would make an appearance alongside her. Regardless of who is chosen, it will play into the movie's strengths to include at least one of the original characters from the beloved group. That's assuming, of course, that any of these actors would be willing and available to return for Chapter 3. As with any fandom, there are mixed feelings among fans about continuing the story of It. A good portion of the audience has read Stephen King's novel and likely believes that the largely faithful adaptation captures the book's tone and message, meaning there is absolutely no need to beat this dead clown over and over again. At the same time, there are others who are curious about how the story could continue and explore more about Pennywise, as long as it is done in a gripping manner and doesn't embarrass the source material. In one thread posted on Reddit, both sides of the fandom aired their opinions about whether or not the franchise should continue. One commenter suggested that the very notion of It Chapter 3 is terrible fan service and insisted that there is no need to continue the story. They even argued that a third movie could turn Pennywise into more of a caricature than a monster. Another Redditor said it's the Losers Club that is the heart and soul of It, meaning a third movie would feel weird without them as the main characters. One user saw both sides of the argument, writing, "Part of me wants to see more Pennywise, but the other part remembers that it was the cast as a whole that made me love Chapter 1 and 2. Plus, a little bit of mystery in the origin of Pennywise is what makes the character interesting." It was no secret that Warner Brothers have been eyeing a prequel for It since the release of Chapter 2. Perhaps that's no surprise, considering the fans reacted so positively to the scene in which Pennywise is shown in his human form without any clown makeup, hinting there might be more to his past connection with the town of Derry.
Close your eyes, Bev.
And sure enough, in February 2023, it was finally confirmed that the horror story will continue as a prequel series for Max titled Welcome to Derry. According to an article published by The Hollywood Reporter, this prequel comes from the minds of Andy and Barbara Muschietti and Jason Fuchs. It will reveal more of Derry and explore why the town is so rife with sinister happenings. Fuchs and Brad Caleb Kane are set to be co-showrunners for the show, while Muschietti is scheduled to direct multiple episodes. While the news of Welcome to Derry excited those who would like to see more of Muschietti's version of It, some unfortunate news arrived soon after. In an interview with Jake's Takes, Bill Skarsgård confirmed he hadn't been asked to return for the series as Pennywise, at least not at that time. This was a surprising turn of events, especially considering how pivotal Skarsgård have been to the film series' success. Then again, since It is a shapeshifter, it's not outside the realm of possibility for Pennywise to have a different face, and that's assuming Skarsgård was even telling the truth. Taking into account Andy Muschietti's involvement in Welcome to Derry, it's looking highly unlikely that It Chapter 3 will ever materialize, at least not as a movie. That being said, Muschietti has admitted that he would like to do something different with the two It films, helping to create a supersized version of both of these features, as well as something a little more. Chatting with Cinema Blend, the filmmaker explained how he wants to include what was shot and omitted from the theatrical cuts, while also filming new footage. He said, "I am thinking of a supercut, which is basically the two movies told one after the other, adding everything that was lifted from them in length purposes. Great scenes that are more character moments, or things that we had to lift for other reasons. I'm also very excited about shooting extra material." For fans, this might sound like an interesting proposition in the same vein of the Lord of the Rings extended editions. Neither It film was particularly short either. The first movie clocked in at 135 minutes, while the sequel was longer at 169 minutes, meaning this supercut could become a behemoth of a feature. Who knows? Maybe with all the cutscenes and additional footage, this could be considered a kind of third chapter in the It story. Many count Christopher Nolan's 2006 thriller The Prestige as one of his finest films, and nothing gets fans going like a sequel. So why have we never seen The Prestige 2? Let's start with the most obvious reason why The Prestige 2 hasn't happened yet. Christopher Nolan simply hasn't expressed any intention to make a sequel. Even if he wanted to, it doesn't seem like Nolan has the time. He couldn't release any kind of sequel right after the release of the original because he had his hands full with his Dark Knight trilogy. Even after he finished up in Gotham, Nolan found plenty of other projects that he presumably found more interesting. Nolan has also expressed interest in doing a James Bond film, so he might prioritize that over a sequel to The Prestige. Meanwhile, some fans speculate that after Oppenheimer, Nolan could attempt to return to a previously unfinished project, a remake of the 1967 show The Prisoner, which Nolan was briefly attached to direct in 2009. Others predict he might continue his trend of historical films such as Dunkirk and Oppenheimer. However, a sequel to The Prestige is at least a remote possibility. That said, there's still a chance that Nolan could return to the world of The Prestige, even after spending more than 15 years working on other films. Nolan seems to prefer taking a break to work on something else before returning to direct a sequel. That's what happened with his Dark Knight trilogy. After moving away from Batman to direct Inception, Nolan came back for The Dark Knight Rises, later admitting to Entertainment Weekly that the break left him invigorated and excited to return to Gotham City.
Speak of the devil, and he shall appear.
It's worth noting that The Prestige actually originated as a small-scale project that Nolan wanted to film in between Batman movies. After releasing Batman Begins, Nolan shared that he was open to doing a sequel, but added that it wasn't his highest priority. In 2005, he told Black Film, "Well, I definitely intend to do something else first. I want to do something smaller after having done such a big film." Now that Nolan has spent over 10 years creating epic standalone films, he might be more willing to come back to The Prestige. Of course, Nolan's sentiments might also have changed since then. In a later interview with Hitflix, he said, "I tend to think that if you have the chance to do a big film, you should do it while you can. I'm always worried maybe I won't be able to do a big film again." While there's still some hope that The Prestige 2 might one day come about, you probably shouldn't hold your breath. Judging by how the first movie ended, producing a sequel would come with some inherent challenges, especially if it were to live up to the original. For one, the absence of Hugh Jackman's Angier would make filming a sequel quite difficult. The rivalry between Borden and Angier sits at the heart of The Prestige. Yet with Angier presumed dead, any sequel would be missing that key element. And while the existence of all those clones could give Nolan a good excuse to bring him back, it wouldn't be easy to do this without seeming contrived. Nolan could also create a new character to face off against Borden. But Hugh Jackman left some pretty big shoes to fill in that regard. Here's another problem. We already know exactly how Angier and Borden perform their magic tricks. The ending of The Prestige already revealed these magicians' deepest secrets, which doesn't leave much to explore in the sequel. While it's possible that The Prestige 2 could unearth more of Borden's secrets or introduce a new character with their own, it would be difficult to top the reveal at the end of The Prestige. Like any good magic trick, a story is less interesting to watch when you already know how it's all pulled off. Since nobody has announced a sequel to The Prestige, there's been no news from Christian Bale on whether or not he would return as Borden. We do, however, know how Bale feels about returning as Batman, which suggests how he might respond to a potential Prestige 2. When asked by comicbook.com if he would be willing to star in a fourth Batman movie, Bale said, "If Christopher Nolan ever decided to do it again, and if he chose to come my way again, then yeah, I would consider it." So it tracks that he would most likely be interested in playing Borden again, so long as Nolan is directing. Since Michael Caine is another frequent Nolan collaborator, it's likely that he would be game to reprise his role as Cutter. Scarlett Johansson probably wouldn't need much convincing to return either. She once described The Prestige as one of the most beautiful scripts she has ever read.
Absolutely perfect, and I thought I have to do this project. I wanted to do it so badly.
Likewise, Hugh Jackman loved The Prestige so much that he urged his own production company to study Nolan's crew as a model. No doubt he'd be thrilled to return as Robert Angier if he were needed. When developing The Prestige, Nolan begged David Bowie to accept the part of Nikola Tesla. He later told Entertainment Weekly, "I told him if he didn't agree to do the part, I had no idea where I would go from there." Now it's impossible to imagine the film without Bowie, and a sequel arguably wouldn't feel complete without Tesla either. Alas, we will not get to see him portray Tesla again, since Bowie died in 2016. Still, Nolan might figure out a way to create a sequel even without Bowie's presence. After all, Nolan managed to write a fitting conclusion to Batman's story without the Joker, and without making his absence obvious. Speaking about the fact that the Joker is barely mentioned in The Dark Knight Rises, Nolan told Empire, "That is something I felt very strongly about in terms of my relationship with Heath and the experience I went through with him on The Dark Knight. I didn't want to do in any way try and account for a real-life tragedy. That seemed inappropriate to me." So if Nolan does ever decide to make The Prestige 2, it seems unlikely that Tesla will have any part to play even off-screen. If The Prestige 2 ever comes to fruition, there are countless possible storylines it could explore. At the end of The Prestige, we saw Alfred Borden reuniting with his daughter and presumably retiring from the stage. But the sequel could well follow Borden as he returns to the magician's lifestyle once more. If Angier isn't coming back at all, another character from the first movie could easily step up to play an antagonistic role. Who better to cross swords with Borden than his former assistant Olivia? She knows most of his tricks after all. Meanwhile, Borden's obsession might lead him to all but abandon his daughter Jess, who would now be a teenager. Or maybe the hopes to train her as his assistant and eventual successor. There are so many paths a Prestige sequel could tread. Basically, anything could happen.
John C. Reilly once said that he can't leave his house without being asked about a Step Brothers sequel, but fans expecting more silly shenanigans from Brennan and Dale are going to be disappointed. Here's why. Ever since Brennan Huff and Dale Doback resolved their differences, fans of Step Brothers have wanted to see more.
Did we just become best friends? Yup!
The 2008 box office hit re-teamed Talladega Nights stars Will Ferrell and John C. Reilly as immature grown men who still mooch off their parents and nearly destroy everyone's lives in the process. While everything ended happily, Step Brothers generated so many ridiculous scenes and memorable lines that it's almost inconceivable that a sequel never entered production.
And you're not gonna not get Randy Jackson's autograph, right?
I would have done the exact same thing.
So why didn't Ferrell, Reilly, and director Adam McKay ever revisit Brennan Dale and their messy family dynamic over the last decade and a half? Well, after the success of Step Brothers, a follow-up film was actually in the works. But as McKay told Collider, Paramount Pictures asked him and Ferrell to make a different sequel, Anchorman 2. After filming that 2013 sequel, McKay and Ferrell decided they didn't want to do another Step Brothers anymore. McKay explained to the outlet, "I don't want to get into the sequel business too much." McKay wanted to try new things, and subsequently, he built a lane for himself as a filmmaker of satirical comedies like Vice and Don't Look Up. But Step Brothers 2 is even less likely to happen now, following a professional and personal falling out between McKay and Ferrell that revolved around their Step Brothers collaborator, John C. Reilly. In 2019, McKay and Ferrell announced that they had ended their creative partnership and closed their company, Gary Sanchez Productions. Years later, the reasons behind the split emerged. As an executive producer, McKay helped bring Winning Time, The Rise of the Lakers Dynasty, to HBO in 2022. Winning Time stars Reilly as team owner Jerry Buss. Although Ferrell lobbied hard for that role, McKay gave it to Reilly without letting Ferrell know. McKay told Vanity Fair, "I should have called him. and I didn't. The director also went on to say that he and Farrell no longer speak to each other. Additionally, both Riley and Farrell have told reporters that a sequel to Step Brothers is a highly unlikely proposition. In a 2018 interview with Screen Crush, Riley explained that he and Farrell, as well as Adam McKay, would rather pursue new projects instead of making a Step Brothers sequel.
Unless we were really sure that we could do a better version or improve on what it is, let's leave it alone.
As for Farrell, he admits he's thought about a sequel but ultimately decided against it. The actor told Rolling Stone in 2017, "You have to resist the temptation. It's just tough because the things everyone wants you to do sequels of are special because there's not a sequel of it." But even though a Step Brothers 2 will probably never get made, Adam McKay said that he and his collaborators have already worked out a plot for a potential sequel. McKay told Collider, "We have a whole story, an outline that we're happy with." Although McKay didn't reveal any more information about the plot, Will Ferrell shared the fleshed-out premise for Step Brothers 2 with the New York Daily News in 2017. As Ferrell told the outlet, the sequel would have centered around Brennan and Dale moving into a retirement community with their aging parents, played by Richard Jenkins and Mary Steenburgen. So if a Step Brothers 2 was to ever happen, would the entire cast return? Well, seeing as the original film is a buddy comedy, it would be unthinkable to make a sequel without either Ferrell or Riley reprising their roles. Furthermore, while discussing possible plotlines for a sequel, both Ferrell and McKay mentioned significant roles for Brennan and Dale's parents. So this means Mary Steenburgen and Richard Jenkins would need to return as Nancy Huff and Robert Doback. Fortunately, Steenburgen told Screen Crush that she'd be happy to appear in a sequel. The Oscar winner told the outlet, "I would be there day one with the biggest smile on my face. I love those guys and the joy of working with them." Step Brothers also featured Adam Scott and Kathryn Hahn in supporting roles. Both actors would go on to find greater levels of fame on shows like Parks and Recreation and WandaVision. Filmmakers would certainly want their star power in Step Brothers 2, so it's a good thing that Hahn is definitely on board.